Our scripture for today is from the book of Ezekiel, the 2nd chapter, beginning with the 1st verse. He said to me, "Son of man, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you." As he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. He said, "Son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their fathers have been in revolt against me to this very day. The people to whom I am sending you are obstinate and stubborn. Say to them, 'This is what the sovereign Lord says.' And whether they listen or fail to listen, because they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, son of man, do not be afraid of them or their words. Do not be afraid, though briars and thorns are all around you, and you live among scorpions. Do not be afraid of what they say, or terrified for them, though they are a rebellious house. You must speak my words to them, whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are rebellious." Now, anybody want to guess what the point is here that God's trying to get through to Ezekiel about the people? He only repeats it like 5 or 6 times in these 7 verses. Of all of the calls of God's people and God's prophets that we find in Scripture, this one is the most difficult for me. Of all of the jobs that the prophets had, or other people that God called, like Joshua and David, to be war leaders and kings, Ezekiel's the one I am most glad I wasn't called to be like. Because God is saying, I got a job for you, and guess what? You're going to fail at it. I want you to preach my message to people, and they won't listen to you. I'm sorry, I'm turning that down. Yep. Which of you wants to take a job you're going to fail at? And that the person interviewing you for the job tells you you're going to fail at. And he says, you're perfect for this job, but you're going to fail at it. It's not your fault. It's their fault. When I was in seminary, and we had to take what was called field education, where we were preaching and serving a church, and then we were meeting with other pastors to talk about what was going on in our church. And I had just told this one story about something that happened in the church I was pastoring, and the leader, the senior pastor in our group, looked at me and said, "You really have a need to be liked, don't you?" I said, "Well, kind of." He goes, "That might be a problem being in the ministry." I said, "Well, in my tradition, if people don't like you, you don't stay very long as a pastor. So there's a real reason I have a need to be liked, besides psychological. I need to keep my job." Ezekiel, in one sense, was a failure. If we look at great preachers and prophets and evangelists in history, if I think of great evangelists in my lifetime, the first name that comes to mind, probably for any of you too, is Billy Graham. And Billy Graham we consider a great evangelist because thousands, hundreds of thousands of people heard him preach and committed their life to Christ. Was Billy Graham called by God to be an evangelist? I'm positive of it. Even though I've never heard the story of how he got called to it, I'm positive God called him to be an evangelist just by looking at his results. I can look at what Billy Graham accomplished and say, Billy Graham did the Lord's work. And when Billy Graham spoke to people about God, they listened to him. Poor Ezekiel. God starts his ministry by saying, Ezekiel, they're not going to listen to you. I want you to tell these people this, but they won't listen. How do I know they won't listen? Because they've never listened. They're an obstinate and stubborn people, and they've been in rebellion against me up to this day. And you're not going to change it. And so, when you compare Billy Graham and Ezekiel, poor Ezekiel. But God tells Ezekiel something else besides they're not going to listen to you. He says, that's not your problem. He said, whether they listen or they fail to listen, and by the way, they won't listen, they will know there has been a prophet among them. Now, I think it's about time, since we're into the prophets now, that I define what it means to be a prophet. Because our society has some wrong ideas about what prophecy is. We've come to the idea that prophecy is about being able to see the future, to know what's going to happen in the future. That's wrong. Prophecy is not being able to see the future clearly. It is being able to see the present clearly. A prophet doesn't look at the world and say, here's what the future is going to be. A prophet looks at the world and says, here's what's going on right now. Because a lot of times if you really know what's going on right now, you know what's going to happen. You know, you walk into your house and your grandchild has piled 2 chairs on top of each other and has climbed on them to try to reach the cookie jar on top of the fridge. You don't need to be able to see the future to know what's likely to happen. All you need to do is be able to see the present clearly. And don't think, oh, well, seeing the present clearly is easy. No, it's not. Because so many people fail to see it clearly, so it must not be easy. They look at the world and think everything's fine. Most people, that's how they go about every day. What's really happened is they're just going through without paying much attention to what's going on. Scientists actually tell us that we all do this with our eyes. That there's so much information that our eyes take in that we can't process it all. And our brains just kind of ignore parts of it. That's why you can be looking at something and when suddenly something moves, your eyes are immediately drawn to it. Because it's a change and your brain says, oh, I need to see what's going on there. It's why 2 people can look at the same thing and see something completely different. Because for each of us, our eyes don't get the whole picture, because our brain, actually our eyes do get the whole picture, but our brains filter it out. And we have different filters. And so we can look at the same thing and see something different. You ever get, they used to be popular about 20 years ago, the pictures where it's just kind of like a picture of something repeating, and then if you stare at it long enough, you see this 3D image pop up? I never could do that. To this day, I can't do that. I went to get my eyeglasses, new prescription, when I was in college, and I went to the college eye department because they taught optometry, and we get discounts as students. So I went there to have my eyes checked. And they were studying binocular vision that day, so everybody got binocular vision tests. And what they do is they give you two slightly different images, one in each eye. And then they want to see how fast your eyes combine them into one image. And it's the principle on how 3D photography works. There's slightly different images in each eye, and you can see a dimension to it. And so he would flip the pictures and say, okay, when do you see one image? I go, now. Flip them again. When you see pictures, now. Instantly, my eyes went to one image. And he said I was the only one who would come in that week who did that. That I could not get my eyes to see two different images. So we see things differently, and we don't see everything. Being a prophet means that we see the world around us clearly. And God's call to Ezekiel was, see the world clearly and tell the people what you see. And they won't listen. They don't want the truth. They want what they're comfortable seeing themselves. Like I said, I would hate to have gotten Ezekiel's call. I don't think I could have done it. God's definition of success for Ezekiel was, be faithful in carrying out my message. For myself, like many other people, our definition of success is based on results. For God, it was based on faithfulness. But I think this can be good news too. Because especially when we base our definition of success on results, especially those who have been called by God, we look at what we've done and we say, did it make a difference? Was it enough? Was I successful in answering your call? It goes all back to that old saying I'm sure your parents told you, and you probably told your kids. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But if you don't lead the horse to water, that's abuse. You can preach the gospel. You can do what God has called you to do. You can share your faith with your neighbors. And maybe they'll listen. And it's wondrous when they do. But God only asks, were you faithful? Did they hear you? Not did they listen to you? Did you preach to them? Not did they accept me. That's on them. God does not judge the success the same way the world does. When God calls you, success is faithfulness. Our closing hymn